If you think the truth is locked away forever, you haven't subscribed yet. Go on. Click it. I dare you. The call came in just after dawn, a single clip message that rippled through Colorado's law enforcement network like a silent alarm. No sirens, no public broadcast, no media notification. Just one coded sentence routed directly to the federal task force. Unaccounted inmate reported at ADX Florence. Immediate investigation requested. The words shouldn't have existed. An unaccounted inmate at ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in America, a place built specifically so that no one could disappear, communicate, or move without being documented, filmed, and tracked down to the second, was impossible. And yet, the message was real. By the time Special Agent Mara Keating arrived, sunlight had barely bled across the high desert. ADX Florence, known in unofficial whispers as America's black hole, stood against the morning like a concrete monolith. Nothing about it moved. Nothing about it breathed. The wind carried no sound except the scrape of dust against steel fencing. Keating stepped out of her SUV and pressed her badge against the reinforced glass of the first security checkpoint. The guard inside barely glanced up before hitting the release button. "Agent Keating," he said, voice steady but eyes tight. "Warden's waiting. Be prepared. The situation is unusual." She nodded and followed him through the first gate. For more waited beyond it, each thicker and more fortified than the last, forming a layered cage of razor wire coils, motion detectors, and silent surveillance towers. ADX Florence wasn't built to hold men. It was built to erase them. Inside the administrative wing, Warden Caldwell stood stiffly behind a conference table, shoulders rigid, ties slightly crooked. Next to him sat two internal affairs officers, both pale, both exhausted. Caldwell wasted no time. At 0322 hours, he began. Routine role verification flagged an anomaly in D Block, Tier 2. One inmate, inmate 4471, did not respond. Keating frowned. Did not respond or did not appear on camera? The warden exhaled slowly. That's the issue. Inmate 4471 does not appear on any camera feed from 0200 hours to present. Sensors show no movement in or out. His cell door never opened. His restraints were untouched. But the cell is empty. Keating paused. Empty as in the inmate is not inside. Her mind raced. ADX cells were solitary units made of reinforced concrete with a 4-inch slit for a window. The door was steel. Every inmate was monitored through cameras embedded into the walls, ceiling, and hallway. Escape was considered not just improbable, but structurally impossible. Yet one inmate was gone. Who was assigned to visual monitoring? Keating asked. Officer Ramirez raised a hand. I was, and I swear, cameras showed nothing unusual. 1 second he was there. The next he wasn't. Any blind spots? No, ma'am. This facility doesn't have blind spots. Keating didn't respond. Not yet. She needed to see the scene for herself. Caldwell nodded to two guards. Take her down. The walk to D Block was a descent into silence. ADX was famous for it. The kind of quiet that pressed against your skin. No voices. No footsteps other than those of guards on duty. Just the hum of ventilation and the distant clank of reinforced doors locking behind them. As they approached Tier 2, Keating felt it. A sudden heaviness in the air, as if the building itself was bracing for what she was about to find. A guard swiped his card and keyed in a long code. The final steel door slid open with a low mechanical churn. There it was. Cell 223. Red tape had been stretched across the doorframe. A small digital screen next to the door displayed a blinking message. Status. Irregular. Review required. Keating stepped forward and peered through the glass slit. The cell inside was spotless. Standard issue cot bolted to the floor. Stainless steel combo toilet and sink. Concrete shelf. Built-in desk. No loose items. Nothing that could be used for digging, picking, prying, or breaking. And no sign of the inmate. She motioned to the guard. Open it. The door unlocked with a metallic thud. Keating entered slowly, her eyes scanning every inch of the room. There was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to squeeze through. No vents large enough for even a hand. The window slit was too narrow for a wrist. Was there any sign of tampering? She asked. None, the guard replied. Walls, door floor, everything's intact. Keating crouched. Even the grout between the concrete slabs looked untouched. The inmate's last known appearance was at 0200 hours, confirmed by timestamp feed. At 0322, the system flagged his absence. How often are visual checks done? Keating asked. Every 15 minutes, the guard answered. And there was nothing off during the cycle. Keating stood and approached the camera embedded in the corner of the ceiling. I want to see the raw footage, she said. All cameras covering this tier from midnight onward. The guard nodded, already stepping away to retrieve the files. Keating stayed inside the cell a moment longer. The air here felt stale, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Something was wrong. Not just the impossible disappearance, but something beneath it. Something no one was acknowledging. She touched the cold concrete wall, and that's when she saw it. A faint mark, barely visible, almost impression rather than a drawing. It looked like a smudge at first, but when she leaned closer, the pattern emerged, a cluster of tiny indentations arranged in a tight, deliberate line. Dot, dot, line, dot, line, dot. She frowned. It wasn't random. It was a sequence. Warden, she called out. I need someone from analysis. This looks like coded communication. Caldwell appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowing. We searched the entire cell, he said. There were no tools, no objects, nothing that could make a mark like that. I'm not saying he carved it, Keating replied. I'm saying he wanted someone to see it. Caldwell looked unconvinced, but Keating didn't care. Her instincts had carried her through too many improbable cases to ignore a clue like this. She snapped a photo with her federal-issued device. This was intentional, she murmured. A message or a sign. But what does it mean? Caldwell asked. Keating didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she stepped back into the hallway as Officer Ramirez returned with a tablet. I pulled the footage you requested, he said. Keating nodded. Play it. On the screen, cell 223's interior appeared. Grainy but clear. The inmate sat on his cot, staring at the opposite wall. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't stand. The timestamp read, 1 hour 58 minutes and 14 seconds. Keating fast-forwarded. The inmate remained still, eyes fixed on some point beyond the camera's view. 2 hours 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Still there. 2 hours 10 minutes and 22 seconds. Still. 2 hours 14 minutes and 7 seconds. Still. Keating's brow furrowed. Is he blinking? Ramirez zoomed in. His face was expressionless. Eyes wide open. No blinking. Keating felt a chill. Continue, she said. The footage sped forward. 2 hours 21 minutes and 40 seconds. 2 hours 28 minutes and 3 seconds. 2 hours 31 minutes and 55 seconds. The inmate did not move a muscle. Keating slowed the playback as the timestamp hit the crucial window. 2:44, 2:45, 02:46. And then it happened. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just one frame, he was sitting on the cot. The next frame, less than a second later, the cot was empty. Keating's heart skipped. No fade out? No glitching? No distortion? She asked. Ramirez shook his head, voice trembling. No. One frame he's there, the next frame he isn't. Like the camera just skipped reality. Keating stared at the screen. Even ADX cameras, built with redundancy, backup feeds, and motion trigger recording, couldn't just miss a moment unless someone wanted them to. But who could infiltrate the most secure prison in America? Who could override a cell feed? Who could erase the presence of a federal inmate without leaving a trace? Her mind raced. What do we know about inmate 4471? She asked. Caldwell hesitated. Too long. Keating turned slowly. Warden. Caldwell looked away. That's the second issue, he said quietly. Records show inmate 4471 was transferred here 5 years ago. But when I pulled his file this morning, there was nothing inside. Keating blinked. What do you mean nothing? I mean the folder exists. The barcode exists. But the pages, identification, intake, legal documents, psychological assessments, are all gone. Deleted? No, Caldwell said. Not deleted. He looked directly at her. Removed. Before Keating could respond, an alarm blared to the hallway. Low, steady, and unmistakably urgent. Tier 2 lights shifted from white to pulsing red. A guard sprinted toward them. "Warden, you need to see this," he said, breathless. "Another cell on this tier. It's showing the same anomaly." Keating stiffened. "Which cell?" The guard swallowed hard. "Cell 219. Caldwell's face drained of color. "That cell is empty too," the guard whispered. Keating felt the silence fall around them like a closing trap. Then she spoke the words no one else could say aloud. "Warden, you don't have one disappearance." She turned toward the corridor where the red lights throbbed. "You have the beginning of something much bigger." The warden's radio crackled. "Sir, we opened the second cell." A guard's voice trembled through the speaker. "You'd better get down here. There's something written on the wall." Keating and Caldwell exchanged a look. They moved quickly. As they approached cell 219, guard stepped aside. The door was open. The room looked identical to the first cell, except for one detail. On the far wall, etched faintly into the concrete, were the exact same markings Keating had photographed. Dot, dot, line, dot, line, dot. Only this time, below the sequence was a final mark. A single deliberate smear. Long, vertical, almost like a signature. Keating's pulse hammered. 2 inmates. 2 disappearances. 2 identical coded messages. And one more thing. Both cells had been empty for longer than the cameras admitted. She stepped back, piecing it together, feeling the cold weight of realization settle in her chest. Someone wasn't just disappearing inmates. Someone was sending messages from inside America's most secure prison. She turned toward Caldwell. "What else aren't you telling me?" she demanded. The warden hesitated. Then he spoke the words that changed the investigation forever. "There's something you need to see in the sub-basement." Keating narrowed her eyes. "What's in the sub-basement?" Caldwell's voice dropped to a whisper. "Something that was never meant to be opened." Keating stared at him. But when they reached the elevator, she saw it. A metal key card hanging from the warden's trembling hand, marked only with one symbol. A black square. A hole. A void. He inserted it into the panel. Deep below the prison, tires hissed against concrete. A cold wind rose from the opening shaft. Caldwell stepped inside and turned to Keating. "When they opened that door years ago," he said, voice shaking, "they sealed something inside. Something no one was supposed to access again." Keating took a breath. "What did they seal inside?" Caldwell met her eyes. "Everything your missing inmates were trying to warn you about." The elevator dropped, and when the doors opened, Deputy Warden Nathaniel Pierce stood in the shadow of the half-open elevator, the metallic groan of its doors echoing to the sub-basement like the slow exhale of something ancient. Agent Marlowe's flashlight cut through the dust hanging in the air, revealing a corridor that shouldn't have been there, a corridor Pierce had hoped never to see again. He told himself to breathe, but even that felt dangerous. The forbidden wing waited in the dark, its entrance framed by concrete walls thick enough to shrug off explosions, its air stale as if time itself refused to flow here. The facility records listed this place as non-existent. Staff rotations trained officers to pretend these sublevels were merely utilities, storage, power lines. But Pierce knew better. He'd been here before. And the last time he'd set foot in this hallway, the screams had taken hours to stop echoing. Marlowe took a step forward, her voice low. "You look pale. You okay to proceed?" Pierce forced a nod. "Just old memories. Nothing more." It was a lie, and Marlowe seemed to sense it. But she turned her attention back to the corridor ahead. Rivera, slightly behind them, pulled his vest tighter and muttered, "This place feels wrong." He wasn't wrong. The wing had been sealed since the incident, an event scrubbed out of logs, deleted from servers, erased from every official channel. The Bureau of Prisons called it a structural malfunction. Privately, They called it something else. The night the prison broke itself. Pierce felt sweat bead on his forehead as the three of them moved deeper. Their footsteps echoed to the abandoned corridor, bouncing off walls that were cracked, blackened, charred in places. Broken sprinkler heads hung like metal vines overhead. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Scorched concrete. The lights were dead. Marlowe's beam illuminated faded warning stripes on the floor. Rivera pointed left. There should be power here. Sublevel wings tie into the backup grid. They disconnected this one, Pierce said before he could stop himself. Marlowe turned sharply. Why? Pierce swallowed. Because no one was supposed to go in again. They reached the first door. Once. Its reinforced glass had been bulletproof, but now it was shattered inward. Fragments still scattered across the floor. Rivera leaned in, examining the jagged pieces. Glass breaks outward when... Don't finish that, Pierce said quietly. The younger agent looked up, confused. Isn't that a clue? It's a memory I don't want revived. But the memory came anyway. There had been a sound, a concussive shock wave that had thrown him off his feet. The lights had died. Alarms had malfunctioned. The steel doors, supposedly fail-safe, had stayed open instead of shutting. And in the chaos, he cut the thought off as Marlowe asked, what was the purpose of this wing? Pierce hesitated. It was meant to be a transitional unit. Temporary containment. Observation cells. You mean isolation? He nodded. A prototype model before the current system. It was never approved. Never supposed to be used. Then why was it operational at all? Pierce felt his throat tighten. Because someone higher up pushed it through anyway. Marlowe stared at him. Who? Pierce looked away. You won't find their name in any record. A distant clang echoed through the corridor. All three froze. Rivera raised his weapon. Was that? Pierce pressed a finger to his lips. This level shouldn't have anyone in it. The clang came again, not threatening, but rhythmic metallic taps, like something swaying gently and brushing against a pipe. Marlowe swept her flashlight around until the beam caught on a sign dangling from a single bolt. Pierce felt his stomach drop. It was a rusted metal placard. C-Wing Protocol Continuity Project. Restricted personnel only. Rivera whispered, What's the continuity project? Marlowe answered before Pierce could. It's not in any file we saw. Of course it isn't, Pierce said softly. He moved ahead, stepping over fallen debris, guiding them toward a heavy security door warped inward. Its frame bent as if something inside had pushed out with impossible force. Rivera touched the twisted steel. What could have done this? Pierce said nothing. The deeper they went, the worse the destruction became. Floors buckled. Ceiling panels lay shattered. A long smear of something dark. Chemical soot, Pierce told himself, streaked along the wall. Marlowe's light fell on a row of cell windows, each blackened. She approached the first, wiping dust from the glass. What happened here, Pierce? It was an incident. He hated how weak his voice sounded. We need more than that. Pierce closed his eyes for a moment before answering. There was a containment failure. Doors malfunctioned. Pressure lock systems shorted. Something caused a chain reaction in the airflow, and then what? Pierce looked at her. Then the inmates panicked. Emergency teams couldn't reach them fast enough. Rivera swallowed. How many casualties? Pierce shook his head. Don't make me say numbers. Marlowe stepped closer to him, voice firmer. Why seal it? Why erase the logs? Why hide it? Pierce rubbed his palms against his knees. Because if the public had known that the safest prison in America lost control of its own prototype wing, the backlash would have crippled the entire federal security system. Rivera spoke up. But what does that have to do with the disappearances now? Pierce hesitated. Marlowe grabbed his arm. Pierce, look at me. Do you know something we don't? His voice cracked. Some of the inmates who died in the incident, their names were never released. Why? Because they weren't officially classified inmates. Rivera stared. Meaning, they weren't supposed to exist. The corridor seemed to grow colder. A sudden slam broke the moment. A steel door at the end of the hall, one that should have been locked, swung shut with a thunderous echo. Rivera raised his weapon again. Someone's here. No one should be, Pierce whispered. But he could feel it. A presence. The same chilling sensation he'd felt the night everything went wrong. Marlowe approached the sealed door slowly. Pierce, what's behind this one? Pierce forced the words out. The control nexus for the wing. If anything survived the incident, it would be there. Survived? Rivera's voice shook. Pierce looked at him. I don't mean a person. I mean data. Footage. Something that explains why this wing was shut down. Marlowe pulled on the door. It resisted, then groaned open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of rust and old electricity. Inside, the control room lay dimly illuminated by emergency strips, still faintly glowing after all these years. Screens were smashed. Consoles were melted in places. A chair rested on its side. On the far wall, a series of old storage drives sat inside protective casings. Rivera pointed. If those still work. They won't, Pierce muttered. Everything was wiped. Not everything, Marlowe said quietly. She knelt, brushing dust off a lower terminal. One not listed in any blueprint Pierce had ever seen. Rivera crouched beside her. A hidden unit? Pierce stepped back, heart pounding. I didn't know this existed. That's why someone kept it, Marlowe said. She pressed a switch. The terminal flickered, then buzzed. Then a distorted recording appeared on the small, cracked monitor. A static-filled hallway view. Time-stamped the night of the incident. Rivera leaned closer. Is that? The grainy footage stabilized just enough to reveal shapes, people, silhouettes, moving quickly, erratically, through the smoke-filled wing. Marlowe whispered, It's survivors. Pierce felt ice crawl over his spine. That's not possible. The screen's perspective jostled suddenly as if the camera had been struck. A shadow turned, faceless in the low resolution, but unmistakably human. It stared directly into the lens. Marlowe froze. Pierce, who is that? Pierce didn't answer. Couldn't, because he recognized the silhouette. The height, the build, the distinct tilt of the head. A man who had died in the wing. A man whose file had been erased. A man whose name was never recorded. The screen glitched, and the silhouette took a step toward the lens. The lights in the control room flickered. The monitor went black. And before anyone could speak, a faint metallic knock echoed from the corridor behind them. Tap, tap, tap. Marlowe raised her light. Rivera steadied his weapon. Pierce felt the air leave his lungs. Because the taps weren't random. They were deliberate. And they came from the door they had just walked through. Something or someone had closed them in. The lights died. Everything went pitch black. And from the darkness, a whisper slipped through the room, spoken in a voice Pierce had not heard in 10 years. You shouldn't have come back. Deputy Warden Nathaniel Pierce didn't scream when the lights went out. He couldn't. His throat locked, every muscle in his body turning rigid as the darkness swallowed the control room whole. The only sound was the frantic breathing of the 3 people inside and the slow, patient tapping on the steel door behind them. Tap, tap, tap. Marlowe's voice cut through the dark in a sharp whisper. Rivera, tactical light. A click, then another. No power, Rivera said, voice cracking. The tapping continued, steady, deliberate. Pierce's mind raced back to the distorted figure on the monitor, to the grainy silhouette staring directly into the camera as if recognizing him, as if waiting for him, as if this moment had been inevitable. The tapping stopped. Silence swallowed the room. Then a new sound emerged, a metallic rattle, like fingers brushing slowly across the steel door from top to bottom, a scraping sound that made the air feel colder. Rivera swallowed hard. Pierce, tell me that's a loose bolt. Pierce couldn't form words. Marlowe spoke firmly. We're not dying in here. Pierce, emergency backup lighting. Where is it? Pierce forced himself to remember. Panel on the right side, under the console. Marlowe crouched, hands sweeping across the dusty floor. Her knuckles hit metal. She flipped the switch. A dim, reddish glow flooded the room. Barely enough to see each other's faces, but enough to erase the darkness. Rivera exhaled shakily. Thank God. The steel door behind them was dented, a fist-shaped dent. Fresh. Rivera stepped back fast, raising his weapon. No. Nope. Absolutely not. Marlowe pointed her flashlight toward the dent, jaw tightening. Her expression a mix of suspicion and dawning horror. There's someone out there. Pierce whispered. There shouldn't be. At that moment, the monitor crackled back to life. Static. A brief flash. Then another camera feed. A different hallway in the SEAL wing. Footsteps appeared in the frame. Slow. Calm. Intentional. A man's silhouette came into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, walking with a slight tilt of the head. Marlowe's eyes narrowed. Is that the same person from earlier? Pierce's stomach dropped. It can't be. He died in the incident. I saw his body. Rivera shook his head. Records say there were. There were no records. Marlowe cut in. That's the problem. On the screen, the silhouette paused, as if listening. Then it turned. Again, directly into the camera. A blurry but unmistakable face filled the monitor. Eyes sunken but alert. Skin pale. Expression hollow and cold. Marlowe whispered, Pierce, who is he? Pierce choked on his answer. The name felt cursed. Marcus Hale. Rivera frowned. Who? Pierce steadied himself. He was part of the continuity project. One of the first inmates transferred into the prototype wing. He was never processed through official channels. Marlowe leaned closer. What was the project? Pierce hesitated. It was meant to test a new model of psychological containment. Minimal interaction. Maximum isolation. It was unethical. It was shut down before it ever launched. Obviously not, Rivera said bitterly. You guys put Hale and how many others in here? Pierce shook his head. Not you guys. I was a junior officer. I didn't know what the wing was really being used for until it was too late. On the screen, Hale began walking again toward the control room corridor. Pierce's heart hammered in his chest. He's coming here. Marlowe grabbed Pierce by the front of his vest. Why would Hale be alive? Pierce's voice was a whisper. Because the continuity project didn't just test isolation. It tested endurance. Psychological breaking points. They wanted to see how long a person could survive without meaningful human contact. Rivera stared at him. That's torture. Yes, Pierce said quietly. It was... Marlowe's eyes flicked back to the dented door. If Hale survived the incident, then he's been down here for 10 years. Rivera stepped away from the door, horrified. 10 years? Living off what? Pierce closed his eyes. Food shipments were rerouted. Automated systems stocked the storage rooms. The wing was supposed to be inactive, but someone kept approving supply deliveries in the database. Marlowe's jaw clenched. Someone kept Hale alive. A low, groaning noise echoed down the corridor outside, metal bending, something heavy dragging. Rivera pointed his weapon at the sealed door. We need to leave. Now. Marlowe nodded. Agreed. Pierce, emergency exit routes. Fast. Pierce pointed to a hatch in the far corner of the control room. There's a maintenance crawl corridor behind that panel. It connects a utility shaft and leads to sublevel A. Rivera hurried toward the panel, kicking aside debris. The monitor flickered again. Hale was now outside the control room, feet from the door, still staring directly at them. Pierce felt every hair on his arm stand up. Rivera pried open the panel with a grunt. Got it. A narrow tunnel stretched into darkness. Marlowe gestured sharply. Go. Rivera climbed in first. Marlowe turned to Pierce. You next. Pierce hesitated, glancing at the screen one last time. Hale lifted a hand, and on the audio feed, faint, crackling, barely human, a whisper echoed. Pierce. Pierce froze. He knows my name. Marlowe grabbed his arm. Move! A thunderous crash slammed against the steel door. Rivera shouted from inside the tunnel. H-E-Y. Move! Marlowe shoved Pierce toward the crawlspace. The second crash was louder, metal warping under the strength of something relentless. Pierce crawled in. Marlowe followed. sealing the panel behind them just as a steel door gave a sickening scream of tearing metal. Inside the cramped tunnel, the three crawled in silence except for their ragged breathing and the distant echoes behind them. Pipes vibrated overhead. Dust fell from the ceiling. Every few seconds, they heard another metallic thud. Something striking the panel they had just closed. Rivera whispered, "He's trying to get in." "No," Pierce said. "He knows how to get in." The thud stopped, which was worse. The silence was predatory. Marlowe pressed forward. "Keep going. The shaft should be close." They crawled faster. A clanging noise echoed somewhere in the ventilation ducts above them. Pierce whispered, voice trembling, "He's using the maintenance routes." Rivera swore under his breath. They reached the end of the tunnel, a vertical shaft with a ladder leading upward. Marlowe climbed first, then Rivera. Pierce grabbed the ladder. When steel rattled violently below, he looked down. A hand had reached through the open tunnel. Long fingers, gray skin, nails cracked, wrist thin but strong. "Hale!" Pierce scrambled upward. Hale's voice drifted up the shaft, soft, almost gentle. "They left us here, Pierce." Pierce climbed faster, heart slamming against his ribs. 10 years, waiting for someone to come back. Marlowe reached the top and forced the hatch open. Rivera climbed out next. Pierce was halfway up when Hale's hand wrapped around his ankle. Pierce nearly fell. Marlowe screamed, reaching down. "Pierce." Hale's grip tightened with terrifying strength. Pierce kicked wildly, heel slamming into Hale's hand. A guttural sound echoed below, pained, furious. Marlowe reached down again. "Give me your hand." Pierce grabbed her wrist. Rivera grabbed her waist, anchoring her. With one final desperate kick, Pierce broke free. They hauled him out of the shaft, slamming the hatch shut. Alarms began blaring in sublevel A. They triggered a breach sensor. Rivera gasped, "He's still down there, right?" Pierce didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. Marlowe dragged them toward the elevator. "We're reporting everything. Every hidden file. Every erased name. No more secrecy." They reached the elevator. Pierce hesitated. Marlowe stared at him. "What?" Pierce looked back down the hallway. The shadows unnaturally still. "Someone kept Marcus Hale alive," he whispered. "Someone approved those supply shipments. Someone hid that control terminal." Marlowe's expression hardened. "You think someone inside the Bureau wanted this buried?" Pierce nodded slowly. "And they still do." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. As they stepped inside, the basement lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Rivera whispered, "Please tell me that's normal." Pierce shook his head. The elevator began rising. Halfway up, the emergency monitor in the corner clicked on. A live security feed appeared. Sublevel C, the sealed tunnel they had escaped through, the hatch they'd locked, and on the floor, footprints, fresh ones, leading away from the hatch. Marlowe stared, horror sinking in. "He's not down there anymore." Pierce's voice was hollow. "No." The last frame on the screen flickered, stabilizing just long enough to show a final image. A shadowed figure stepping into the hallway of sublevel A, head tilted, eyes forward, walking calmly toward the elevators. The feed cut to black. No alarm, no warning, no final reassurance. Just silence. Marlowe closed her eyes. "We didn't contain him." Pierce swallowed hard. "We didn't even understand him." The elevator continued upward. They were no longer alone in the prison. And whatever Marcus Hale had become during those 10 years, he was no longer the inmate the system had tried to erase. He was a truth it could no longer hide.